There's a certain kind of silence that follows a piece of life-changing news, not the kind that screams with panic or grief, but the hush of awe. That's what I remember when Sophie told me she was pregnant. We were standing in the kitchen on a Sunday morning, the light golden and slanting in through the window. She slid the pregnancy test across the table like it was a secret she wasn't sure she should share. Her eyes were wide and uncertain, lips slightly parted like she was still tasting the words she hadn't yet spoken. And I was flooded. Tears rose before I could stop them. I pulled her into my arms, held her so tightly she laughed and cried at the same time. "We're going to be parents," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I'm going to be a dad." That moment, pure, crystalline joy, still feels like it happened to another man. Someone whole. Someone blissfully unaware. The weeks that followed were a montage of gentle happiness. We painted the spare room soft green. We picked names, Elias if it was a boy, May if it was a girl. We whispered to the baby, our hands resting on Sophie's growing belly. We read books on parenting at night, her head on my chest, our bodies curled like two parentheses sheltering a secret. She was glowing. Everyone said so. I believed it too, even when I noticed her mood swinging like a pendulum. I chalked it up to hormones, didn't I? That's what everyone says, pregnancy is a storm, and the best thing a man can do is anchor himself and stay steady. But then there were the missed appointments. "Oh, they rescheduled me," she'd say, or, "I didn't want to bother you, I just went alone." Her phone, once a thing she left carelessly on counters or beside the bed, became a permanent fixture in her back pocket. When I'd reach for it playfully, just to change a song or check the time, her fingers would dart out, casual but too quick. Still, I didn't let my mind go there. Love makes you give people the benefit of every doubt. One night, I came home early from work, flowers in hand, planning to surprise her. The apartment was dark. Her car was in the lot, but the silence inside was heavy and strange. I walked in, called her name. The bathroom door was cracked open, light spilling through. I heard whispering. I stepped closer. Just her voice. Talking low. I froze, not because I thought she was doing anything wrong, but because of the tone. It was unfamiliar. Affectionate, yes. But not meant for me. When I pushed the door fully open, she was just finishing a voice message. She jumped, her hand instinctively hiding the phone. "You scared me," she said, smiling too brightly. "You're home early. Who were you talking to?" She looked at me then, eyes wide and innocent. "No one," she said. "Just leaving a message for Mom. She's worried about the baby." I didn't press. Why would I? That night, we curled up in bed and listened to the baby's heartbeat on a little Doppler monitor we bought online. That rapid thrum, like a galloping horse, was the only proof I needed that everything was fine. Except, it wasn't. I would come to understand that silence, what I thought was awe, was really something else. A stillness before the breaking. A quiet held too long. Like the breath of someone with a secret. And secrets, I would learn, rot slowly until they surface. Time has a way of dulling your senses when you're comfortable. You stop noticing the little things, how long someone takes in the shower, how often they check their phone, the way their smiles don't always reach their eyes. I didn't notice, not at first. At our next prenatal appointment, Sophie insisted on going alone again. She said it was just a checkup, nothing special. Besides, she added lightly, "You've got that big project at work. I don't want you to miss more time." But that project had ended the week before. She knew that. I didn't remind her, just nodded and let her kiss me on the cheek before she left. Something about the kiss felt off. Like it was too calculated. A gesture, not a feeling. I stood at the window for a while after she drove off, her taillights blinking red at the corner. That evening she came home radiant, as if she had been touched by something otherworldly. She handed me a new ultrasound photo, the baby a tiny silhouette now with distinguishable limbs and a slightly oversized head. I smiled. I wanted to cry. "I heard the heartbeat again," she said, putting her bag down. "It was perfect. Fast and strong." "You could have called me while you were there," I said, trying to keep my tone light. She shrugged. Next time. Next time never came. I tried to distract myself. I dived into preparing for fatherhood. I built the crib myself. Painted a mural on the nursery wall, an ocean with tiny whales and curling waves. Every stroke was a promise. I imagined bedtime stories and midnight feedings. I imagined cradling a child with Sophie's eyes in my hands. It was a fantasy, but it kept me breathing. The doubts, though, they started creeping in like water under a locked door. One evening, while doing laundry, I noticed a pair of boxer briefs in the hamper that weren't mine. A brand I didn't wear. I stood there holding them, heart pounding like I'd run a mile. I must have stared at them for a solid minute before I forced myself to toss them back in with the rest. "Sophie," I called out, voice thin. "Are these yours?" She was in the kitchen. "What?" "These boxers." A pause. Then, "Oh. Those? Probably from when my brother visited last month." Her brother. Right. He had stayed for 2 nights. I nodded and left it at that. I didn't want to seem paranoid. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who didn't trust his pregnant wife. Besides, what would be the alternative? That she was cheating. Carrying another man's child. That was unthinkable. Wasn't it? But unthinkable things happen. A few days later, I caught her crying in the bathroom. The door wasn't shut all the way. I could see her through the mirror, knees to her chest, eyes red, mascara streaked down her cheeks. I stepped in quietly. "What's wrong?" She wiped her face, stood quickly. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "Just hormones. I'm fine." She smiled at me then, that same too bright smile. And I hugged her, even as something inside me recoiled from the way she trembled in my arms. It wasn't the tremble of vulnerability, it was the kind you feel in someone who's barely holding a wall up. That night I lay awake long after she fell asleep, her breathing steady beside me. I watched the ceiling, counting the tiny imperfections in the plaster. 1, 2, 3. I told myself I was being dramatic. That love required faith. But faith, when stretched too far, starts to fray. And mine was starting to unravel. The night I followed her, I hated myself. I told myself it wasn't what it looked like. That I was doing it because I loved her, because I needed to protect what we were building. That's the lie we tell ourselves when the truth feels too dangerous to face. But deep down, I already knew. Sophie said she was going to meet her cousin for dinner. Something about planning the baby shower. I kissed her goodbye, watched her pull on a sweater that didn't quite cover the curve of her belly, and smiled as she waved. Then I waited exactly 5 minutes before getting into my car. She wasn't headed to the restaurant she mentioned. Not even close. I followed at a distance, the way someone does in the movies, my hands sweaty on the wheel. I hated every second of it. Hated the way my heart pounded when she turned down a quiet residential street. Hated how she parked and sat in her car, checking her phone. Hated how I already knew, somehow, before anything happened, that this was the moment everything would start to break. Then he came out. Tall. Athletic. His walk confident and unhurried. I didn't recognize him. Sophie got out and met him halfway. They didn't kiss. It wasn't that obvious. But they hugged, and it was long. Intimate. Her face turned into his chest for a moment, his hand cradling the back of her head. I watched them go inside. My hands trembled. I had a choice then, to confront her, to barge in, to shatter whatever lies still held my world together. But I didn't. I drove home like a man made of glass, terrified of shattering before I made it to the door. That night, she returned home with a box of cupcakes and a small notebook filled with sketches for the baby shower. She was glowing again. She kissed me on the cheek, asked how my day was. I stared at her and felt something hollow open inside me. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Instead, I began to watch more carefully. I checked phone records when she slept, saw numbers that repeated. One in particular. I wrote it down, stared at it like it was a secret code I needed to break. The next day, I called it. A man answered. His voice was casual, slightly confused. Hello. I didn't speak. Just listened to the silence that stretched between us. Hello, he said again, more firmly. I hung up. I started noticing little things, how Sophie's explanations came a beat too late, how her stories had tiny holes. One night, I asked her directly, "Do you still love me?" She looked at me, surprised. "Of course I do." "Why would you ask that?" "No reason," I lied. "Just wondering." She kissed me then. Her lips were soft and warm, but something in them was off. Like she was trying to remind herself how it was supposed to feel. And still, I said nothing. The final straw came unexpectedly. I was organizing our bedroom closet, trying to find a place for a box of winter clothes. Tucked behind a suitcase, I found an envelope, unsealed, as if forgotten. Inside were printed ultrasound photos, different from the ones she'd shown me. The name printed on the top was hers, but the date on the scan. It was a month earlier than what she'd told me. A month too soon. I checked the estimated conception date on the scan. And then I sat down on the floor. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, the photos limp in my hands, my breath trapped somewhere between disbelief and the first flicker of heartbreak. The math didn't add up. Not if I was the father. That night, I sat across from her at dinner and smiled. She talked about paint colors again. About baby names. Her laughter filled the room, and I nodded, said all the right things. But inside, I was already drifting, slowly, painfully, toward the edge of the lie we were living. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Sophie left early, off to a prenatal yoga class she had just joined, or so she said. I didn't ask where she was really going. I already knew I couldn't trust the answer. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me, the ultrasound photos spread out like evidence at a crime scene. I stared at them until the words and dates blurred together, and even then I kept staring. I made an appointment with a private clinic that same day. I didn't tell her. I couldn't. They offered a non-invasive paternity test, something they could do before the baby was born, using a blood sample from Sophie and a swab from me. I asked about discretion. The nurse, with a gentle look, assured me it could all be done without revealing the reason to her. They would draw her blood under the pretense of routine labs, something normal in pregnancy. She wouldn't know unless I told her. I scheduled it for the following week. That night, I couldn't look at her the same. I watched her eat the dinner I made, lasagna, her favorite, and wondered if she ever really loved me, or if I had simply been a shelter she needed until the storm passed. She caught me staring and smiled. "What?" "Nothing," I said. "Just thinking." She reached across the table, took my hand in hers. I should have pulled away. But I didn't. I squeezed back, and in that gesture was every lie I told myself, that things might still be okay, that maybe this was just a misunderstanding. But the next day, I saw her phone light up with a message. I wasn't snooping, at least, that's what I told myself. But when you live with suspicion, everything becomes a clue. A warning. A crack in the surface. The message read, "Thinking about you. I know you're scared. But I'm here." She turned the phone face down when she saw me glance. Didn't even acknowledge it. I said nothing. Again. We went to the lab 3 days later. I played my part well, held her hand, kissed her temple, acted every bit the expectant father. She was cheerful, even giddy. The technician complimented her glow. I nodded, smiled, tried to keep my chest from collapsing in on itself. Afterward, she suggested brunch. I told her I had errands. I waited for the results like a man waiting on a final verdict. I knew what was coming. I did. But knowing doesn't always prepare you. There's a part of the heart that clings to hope even as the rest of it is breaking. 3 days later, the clinic called. The woman on the phone spoke gently, like she'd done this many times before. "Mr. Alden," she said. "The paternity test results are in. Based on the fetal DNA analysis, we can confirm with 99.99% certainty." I didn't hear the rest. I didn't need to. It wasn't mine. Not my child. Not my future. Not my family. I hung up the phone and stared at the nursery. The mural I painted. The crib I built. All of it, drenched in a lie. That night, I sat beside her on the couch as she scrolled through baby clothes on her phone, humming softly to herself. I watched her for a long time, memorizing her face. The curve of her cheek. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear. When she looked up and smiled, I managed to smile back. Because I wasn't ready. Not yet. She noticed the silence first. It was in the way I stopped touching her belly when she guided my hand. The way I didn't suggest baby names anymore, didn't look up stroller reviews or nursery lights. I became quieter, colder. I was there, physically, but the version of me she had loved was starting to retreat. "Are we okay?" she asked one night, her voice thin. I looked up from the plate I wasn't really eating. "Do you think we are?" She blinked, surprised by my tone. "You've been distant. You've been dishonest," I said. The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and impossible to ignore. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I know the baby isn't mine." The world stopped. She stared at me, her lips parting, but no sound came. Her eyes didn't immediately fill with tears, which I expected. No, what came first was stillness, as if her mind was working through the machinery of denial and damage control. "Who told you that?" she whispered. "I had a test done. A non-invasive one. The DNA, it doesn't match." Her face collapsed, and she dropped her fork. It clattered against the plate. "You tested me without telling me. You lied to me without flinching." Her hands went to her stomach, as if shielding the baby from the judgment curling in my voice. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," she said. I was scared. Of what? Of me? Of telling the truth. Of losing you, she whispered. That hurt. Not because it made me pity her, but because I knew part of her meant it. She had betrayed me, yes, but she had also, in some twisted way, wanted to keep the life we had built. "I would have stood by you if you had just told me," I said. "But you didn't give me that choice. You built this whole fantasy, let me build it with you, and you let me believe it was mine. All of it. Him. You. Us." Tears spilled from her eyes now. "It wasn't just fantasy for me. I wanted you to be the father. I prayed you were. I hoped. You knew, Sophie. You knew." She sobbed. Raw and shaking. I stood, numb, and walked away from her. I locked myself in the guest room and sat there until morning, listening to her cry through the walls. The next day, she was gone when I woke up. No note. No explanation. Just a folded baby onesie on the couch, the same one we picked out together weeks ago. It said Daddy's favorite in soft blue print. I stared at it for a long time before I finally folded it up and placed it back in the drawer. Because I didn't know what else to do. The house was too quiet after she left. It wasn't just the absence of her footsteps or the hum of her voice, it was the silence of dreams that had nowhere left to live. The nursery door stayed closed. I couldn't bring myself to open it. Every time I walked by, I'd pause, as if expecting to hear a sound, a heartbeat, a whisper, something. But there was nothing. I didn't tell anyone for a while. Not my friends. Not my parents. I couldn't find the words. I couldn't stomach the shame. Everyone had been so excited. My father had started calling himself Grandpa the moment we told him. My mom had bought baby booties and tiny socks she'd knitted herself. What would I even say? That it was all a lie. Some nights I almost called her. I'd stare at my phone, thumb hovering over her name. I wanted to scream. I wanted answers. But mostly, I just wanted to hear her voice and believe, for a second, that none of it had happened. But I didn't call. She reached out once, just a message. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I hurt you. I don't know how to make it right." I didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. I read it every night like a ritual, like tracing the outline of a wound just to feel where it still stung. Weeks passed. I moved through life like a shadow, working, sleeping, eating. My coworkers noticed something was wrong, but no one said anything directly. I think they assumed I was stressed about the baby. Eventually, I told my sister. She sat in stunned silence, a hand over her mouth. Jesus, she whispered. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted. It's not like I can forget. But I also can't stop feeling like I lost something real. Even if the baby isn't yours. She was mine, I said. Before I knew. She was mine. That was the most painful part, the way my heart still twisted when I saw baby shoes in store windows, or when I passed parks filled with young parents. The loss wasn't just her betrayal, it was the loss of something I had already loved, something I had already made space for in my life. I started seeing a therapist. I didn't know what else to do. She told me that grief comes in layers, that betrayal and mourning are often tangled together. That I had to let myself feel the devastation before I could even think about healing. And so I did. Slowly. One breath at a time. I threw out the ultrasound photos one night. Not in anger, just necessity. They weren't real anymore. Or maybe they never were. But holding onto them was like trying to relight a candle with wet hands. Still, I kept the onesie. Folded. Hidden. A relic of a life that almost was. Months passed. Life didn't so much move forward as it pulled me reluctantly with it. I went back to work full-time. I spent more time with my sister and her kids. I started cooking again, trying new recipes, filling the apartment with smells that didn't remind me of Sophie. I even painted over the nursery mural, something plain and white. It felt like erasing a memory I wasn't ready to let go of, but I did it anyway. One day, while cleaning out the hall closet, I found the scrapbook Sophie had been making, the one filled with pregnancy updates, photos, and clipped quotes from parenting books. I hadn't seen it since she left. I opened it. The first page was a photo of us the day we found out. My smile was real. So was hers. For all the lies that followed, I don't think that moment was fake. I flipped through it slowly. There were notes in the margins, things she wanted to remember, hopes she had. One entry, scrawled in the corner, read, "I'm scared he'll leave me if he ever finds out." And beneath that, smaller, "I still want him to be the father, even if he isn't." I closed the book and sat there for a while, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't feel rage anymore. Just grief. Grief for what we could have been if she had told me the truth. Grief for the child I was already loving when the truth took that love away. I finally messaged her back. "I got your message. I'm not angry anymore. But I can't be in your life. That chapter's closed. I hope you and the baby are okay. Take care." She replied quickly. "Thank you. That means more than you know." That night, I slept without waking up for the first time in weeks. Healing didn't come in a straight line. Some days I still heard her laugh echo down the hallway. Sometimes I still woke up from dreams of holding a baby with her eyes in my hands. But they didn't break me anymore. I started dating again, slowly, cautiously. I told one woman, months into seeing her, about everything. She didn't flinch. Just took my hand and said, "That's a hell of a wound. But it sounds like you survived it." "I did," I said. "Mostly." We talked late into the night about the things we hold on to, the pain we learn to carry without letting it define us. That was when I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting to live again. Spring arrived softly, like a breath held too long finally let go. The trees outside my apartment unfurled their leaves, timid and bright. I started taking walks again, down by the lake where Sophie and I used to go in the early days. I expected pain the first time I went back, but what I felt instead was distance. Like those memories belonged to someone else, a man who hadn't yet learned what it meant to break and build himself again. One afternoon, I passed a couple sitting on a bench, the woman visibly pregnant. She laughed, throwing her head back as the man rested a hand on her belly. For a moment, I felt the sharp sting of what might have been. But then I smiled. Not because I had forgotten, but because I had forgiven her. And, more importantly, myself. Forgiven myself for not seeing the signs. For believing. For loving too fully. For losing a future I never had the power to keep. I saw Sophie one last time. It was by accident. A grocery store downtown. She was thinner, her hair tied back, a diaper bag slung over one shoulder. The baby was in the cart, maybe 6 months old. He had her eyes. She didn't see me at first. I stood at the end of the aisle, watching them. The boy gurgled, waving a toy in the air. She laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. There was a tiredness in her that hadn't been there before, but also something fierce and focused, like the fire of someone doing their best. Our eyes met. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she offered a hesitant smile. I nodded once. That was all. And it was enough. I walked out into the spring light, something in me lighter than it had been in a long time. I wasn't going to carry this story like a wound anymore. It was a scar. And scars don't disappear, but they do fade. That night, I stood in the doorway of the now empty nursery. The walls were white, but sunlight made them gold. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stood there and let the silence fill me, not the silence of betrayal, but the kind that comes with peace. Then I turned off the light, closed the door, and walked into the rest of my life.